scissors. Oh my god, I keep kicking this camera. I keep kicking this camera. Hi, I'm Aura Van Dank, and welcome back to MurdersADrag. This is episode 17, and it is like the 5th episode of my YouTube Kerfluffle series. That's the professional name for it, in case you weren't aware. I got some sun, even though I am been white my whole life and should know to wear sunblock. I did not, and now I am burned, and I look a little crispy, and I'm really hoping that my foundation will still match my skin. So, anyhow, this week I am going to be covering the 2002 murder of drag performer, trans icon, and matriarch in the trans community of Philadelphia, Niza Morris. Every week I take my eyebrows off with something different. This week it's a towel and some water. Niza was a very talented and well-known drag performer in the Philadelphia scene. She was 6'2" and known for wearing stunning stilettos and these leopard print gowns, form-fitting. She was sickening. Niza really knew how to work a crowd. She was a very established queen, as I said. She had been doing it for many years, and she worked at the popular gay club Bob and Barbara's in Philly. A lot of people have described her performances as electrifying. And I can only imagine because she was known for performing Eartha Kitt and Peggy Lee often, and oh boy, if I could have seen that once. Just once. All around, Niza was one of the most captivating queens in Philadelphia's drag history. Excuse me, herstory. Niza came out as transgender in her early 20s, and she began living her life very much unapologetically and very much as her genuine self. And like most trans people, unfortunately, Niza experienced a lot of violence, a lot of harassment, and experienced homelessness. She turned to sex work like a lot of LGBT people do because they're in similar situations. And her life while she was having to do all of that was nowhere near easy, obviously. She experienced a lot of hardship. Being a trans black woman today is terrifying enough as it is, and unfortunately 30 years ago it was even more terrifying than it is today. And because she had to live this difficult life in the street, and also because black trans women are arrested and incarcerated at a disproportionately high rate, she had a lot of run-ins with the Philadelphia Police Department. Needless to say, the odds were absolutely stacked against Niza for her whole life. And although she did live through all that hardship and deal with all that heartbreak and tragedy and trauma, she found peace and kind of found a home within her LGBT community and with drag, and she had that outlet of being able to perform. And just by how her performances were described, you can tell how powerful of an outlet that was for her. She really was able to go out and let out all that hurt and all those years of oppression and being abused and traumatized while she was on stage and while she got to perform. Along with drag legend, Philadelphia trans community matriarch, and all-around icon, Niza was also the founder of a Buddhist faith group for trans folks and an advocate for gender-variant sex workers and protecting them and building a system that protects instead of oppresses. In an article for the Philadelphia Inquirer, Philly native Abdul Ali wrote an article remembering and raising awareness about Niza's murder. And in that article, they remembered seeing Niza elegantly moving through what is called Philly's neighborhood. They also remember their impression being that she was a beautiful black transgender woman. I recall her kindness. "Hey baby," she would say, greeting you as she passed by. "Almost 20 years ago I stumbled upon the neighborhood and was captivated by the boldness and beauty of blackness, hers especially." So clearly, Niza was a huge icon in her community. She was an inspiration for other black transgender folks to be unapologetically themselves in a safe way, and all around she was a fantastic individual. On December 22nd, 2002, Niza decided to go out for a party at the Key West Bar, which was a popular gay bar in that Philly neighborhood that we were just talking about. That night, Niza decided to get drunk for the holidays. That night, Niza had definitely had way too much to drink, and when she had tried to leave the bar around 2 a.m., she didn't make it very far before she collapsed on the sidewalk. When bystanders saw this, they immediately stepped in and formed a circle around Niza, protecting her while they waited for paramedics to arrive. And it's really not uncommon for queens to drink to excess, and I couldn't exactly pinpoint why. Maybe it's because of the drag culture, the bar culture, maybe it's being exposed to that all the time. But it's just something I've noticed that's very prevalent in the community. Queens drinking a lot. Like, a lot. Now, this next bit of the story is essentially the story that the news got the next day, but as you'll learn later on, this is not exactly what happened. After the paramedics arrived, Elizabeth Scala arrived on scene and offered to call Niza an ambulance. Niza waved her off, I'm assuming something like that, because she was incapacitated at this point. She couldn't speak, she couldn't stand, she couldn't do anything for herself. So after she refused the ambulance, the officer offered to take her to the hospital herself in the cruiser, and Niza refused that as well. And she wasn't comfortable around police because of her experience that she had already had with the Philadelphia Police Department. So when she was offered a courtesy ride home, Niza reluctantly accepted that from, what's her name? Officer Scala. Scala then allegedly drove Niza to 15th and Walnut Street, where she says Niza somehow was able to tell her she lived, which was not true. That's not where Niza lived, and allegedly dropped her off there. Minutes later, they're called back to the scene because Niza's laying on the sidewalk bleeding from a fractured skull. When officers arrived, they called it in as a DK, which is police code for a drunken fall, or an accident. Niza was then taken to the hospital, where she lay unidentified for 64 hours before she was taken off of life support and passed away on Christmas Eve of 2002. The next day, Niza's mother received a very cold and very disrespectful call from an investigator, misgendering her daughter, stating simply, "He's dead." Now, the inconsistencies in this case are baffling. And mind you, it's 2002, so things were a little bit different 18 years ago, but not a whole lot different than they are, unfortunately, than they are today. For starters, Elizabeth Scala claimed that she was the first officer on the scene. Logs proved that that was a lie. She was not the first officer on the scene. Officer Novak was the first officer on the scene. Kenneth Novak. Second piece of I guess Niza was more willing to speak with Elizabeth, maybe because she was a woman, or maybe because she had actually had previous run-ins with Officer Kenneth Novak in some of the times where she was arrested when she was a sex worker. Okay, so let's get this straight. Novak gets there. Scala's called as his backup. Scala tells Novak she doesn't need him, she can handle this 6'2" incapacitated drunk transgender woman on her own. Yet Novak does not take himself out of this call and put himself back into service to take